Of course, the telephone number 0117 230 0558. Well, joining me on the line now, hopefully, is Sabine McNeill. Hello, Sabine.
Hello.
How are you?
Well, trying to recover.
Yes, I can imagine with the news that we've seen in our mainstream media over the last couple of days. But the summing up, the Pauffley summing up, has come quite of a shock. I've downloaded the report. It's quite big. It's as you can see, it's pages and pages and pages. It seems to be riddled with contradictions, and when you get to the bit about medical evidence and things like that, and the doctor involved, it seems to me there was no regard to that medical report. And well, you know, this is my personal view. I just think it's another clear, utter cover-up from Pauffley, who seems to be involved in these cases.
I'm delighted that that's your first impression.
It is my first impression, yeah.
I actually expected a judgment about the fate of the children. Where would they go? The worst would be to the father, and of course the best to the grandparents.
But wasn't this was like a summing up? Well, not a summing up. It was like an investigation into the investigation, as it were. It was a special, was it 12-day case or something? But this wasn't necessarily to judge on what's going to happen with the kids yet. Isn't that going to be a further case?
Oh, well, no, but of course that has to be the outcome. I mean, it was the so-called fact-finding hearing, but I mean the judgment is obviously supposed to decide about the fate of the children, but of course that has been the whole problem, that at the hearing of January 26th, the judge ignored the mother's position statement, and that's when she and Belinda Mackenzie came out of the hearing saying she has no intention of returning the children. And that's why we started the petition on February 2nd to return the children. And that eventually led to the internet explosion. And our impression is now that this judgment was really made mainly to counter the internet explosion, to tell us off, to tell us who's the boss, and that their machinery with the mainstream media is a hell of a lot more effective than we little people on the internet.
Yeah.
After all, they've managed to delete lots and lots of videos on YouTube. They've managed to close my 3 accounts on Facebook, plus banned other people.
Well, it's all been one-sided, isn't it?
Behind them as well.
One witness.
So it is quite serious, in my view, what's happened. But the really positive side of this judgment is, in my view, that after several made the term pedophilia topical, now Ms. Pauffley has made the term Satanism topical.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it seems to me a very one-sided case, because I mean, she made light of the fact that the mother wasn't there to represent herself, and neither was her partner. But the fact is that she was intimidated out of the country. You know, so she was on a bad footing from the start, which seems to be a particular pattern in some cases that we've looked into, to people whistleblowing, especially involving schools. We had Brian Gerrish on last week, who told us about the case of a mother down in Cornwall that had done the same, and had come across the inappropriate pictures of children were being passed around the school between teachers, and she was evidently arrested, and they tried to section her, and they were forcing drugs on her. So we have seen cases where individuals have stood up against this. If you're part of a group, it seems that you seem to be in a safer position to do this whistleblowing. But Judge Pauffley, one of her statements in the opening parts was, "I'm able to state with complete conviction that none of the allegations are true. I am entirely certain that everything Mrs. Draper, her partner Abraham Christie, and the children said about those matters were fabricated. These claims are baseless. Those who have sought to perpetrate them are evil and or foolish." Now, this to me seems like a typical pattern on labelling people that, you know, are going against the grain, as it were, because in that court there was a witness there that said they had up to 16 different people working for the local authority and the court to try and slam this case down, but there was no representation at all of the parents on that side. It seemed to me it wasn't allowed, so it was very, very one-sided anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's what John Hemming, MP, has said over and over again as well, there is just no chance of having a fair trial. The local authorities, there's no equality of arms, as one calls it. The local authority always have the deeper pockets. And in the end, the judges listen to them and always would prefer their experts to be right than anybody else's. Now, the mother was prevented from being there because 9 police showed up without a warrant, without an arrest warrant at her house. So that was she should have or could have, if she had known, made some kind of an application. But of course, she by then had totally lost, as did Belinda Mackenzie, faith in the judge delivering a fair trial. You see, it's very interesting that you compare with that case that you've just mentioned, because we've observed patterns over and over again, and one of them is obviously the gagging. Well, it so happens that Judge Pauffley also got Belinda to do what I call a corporate gag. She got her to make an undertaking, or to give an undertaking, that none of the members of the Association of Mackenzie Friends would report on the case. Well, one of them immediately said, "No way," and I can't. I said, but I did receive an order, and in fact, that I had to appear before Judge Pauffley, which I did, and the order was obtained by the barrister of the Barnet Council, talking to the judge privately without the mother.
Yeah, this goes on.
It's completely against all ethics of barristers and solicitors. And of course, but it's such a minor battle then to fight. It's not worth fighting. And so in a way, I can understand the mother not having been there, but we've been begging her to instruct her, for her to instruct a solicitor who had come forward to in fact defend me, but she just had lost too much faith in the whole system altogether.
When you hear statements like this is from Judge Pauffley. She says there's no substance in the assertion that the mother has been prevented from participating at this hearing. If she'd been arrested on the 12th of February in connection with harassment allegations, the overwhelmingly likelihood is that she would have been released on bail, enabling her to come to court on the 17th of February. If she'd been remanded in custody, I would have been in contact with the police and prison authorities so as to make the appropriate arrangements for Mrs. Draper's attendance at court. Well, we've seen what's happened when someone's been arrested on these faked up harassment charges. They end up in prison. They're totally abused. I'd put it to the fact that they're actually tortured if you look at the case of Melanie Shaw. So there's no comfort in that drawn from Pauffley at all, and it seems to be a protocol. She goes around on many of these cases, and to me she seems to be like a damage limitation operative on behalf of the judiciary.
Yes, I think so too. I mean, in a way, I was amazed that Belinda did give her the benefit of the doubt. But when I was before her, then at that point, she just kind of basically asked me to take down 1 or 2 items which were completely harmless. I mean, one is completely ridiculous, in fact, because it was, I listed the case, which was Barnet versus Draper. And the council claimed that Draper would lead to the identification of the children. Completely pathetic, in other words. But in our position statement, we made it very clear. Either you return the children or we expose, more or less, And so that's how the petition started. Now, that fact that then this spiteful work, as she called it did, was completely unplanned, was completely unforeseeable, and completely uncontrollable. But no, the Barnet Council went as far as putting a chronology together and blamed anybody and everybody, and especially Ella and myself, for everything, which is just completely impossible. So I bothered to put in an application to set that order aside, but of course everything has now been, wiped across from the table with this fabulously published judgment which was released via the Press Association even before it was handed down in court. As some people spotted, it was published by the Daily Mail and the Telegraph before it was handed down. but it says it speaks about satanic cult. I mean, it has actually been a very significant line that so far hadn't been transgressed. There are oodles of people who deny satanic cults outright. They just don't want to believe it.
Well, if they don't want to believe it, Sabine, then they have to ask the Metropolitan Police why they have a special satanic abuse unit. If it doesn't exist,
yes.
Why have the police got a special unit, satanic abuse unit? That's one thing, that it's one of the first questions I ask.
Well, look, can I interject here?
Yeah, sorry, totally.
Because, I mean, we were talking, weren't we, just before Sabine arrived. Hi, Sabine, by the way.
Hi, Tony.
About Dennis Wheatley and his research into Satanism, black magic, this kind of thing, which he was doing back in the late 1920s, 1930s as a writer. And he makes it pretty clear in a book he's written, which is, I think, came out in about 1972 or something, called The Devil and All His Works, that most of this is done not because these people are any great believers in some kind of horned god or anything like that, but it's done to put the fear of God into the children. That it really is about fear, and using fear to control, almost like a kind of sheepdog barking on the edge of a flock of sheep. This kind of thing is extremely powerful, and I would also point to particularly to Valerie Sinison, who I've interviewed, and her work in actually helping people who've been in these satanic abuse rings has been absolutely amazing, as far as I can see. And she has a complete and utter understanding of the way this is used to really hit psychological triggers at the earliest possible age in children, so that then they start to become utterly in fear and utterly obedient, and then they have a whole part of their personality where they have stuff going on in their lives, but that they know they can't talk about it. So the whole thing is a kind of psychological trick, as far as I can see. And I would send anybody, and I would point anybody who has been poo-pooing this. For example, Ian Hislop in Private Eye, despicably, who says that there's no such thing as this going on, and get them to have a chat to Valerie Sinison. She's running a clinic which is NHS funded, which is government funded, for people who are in this, who have had this kind of abuse, and she's doing great work in actually giving people the confidence to go to court and do this kind of stuff. So for anybody to now say that satanic abuse doesn't exist is utterly ridiculous. It does, and it's used as a very, very powerful weapon through fear to control some of the most vulnerable people in our society. It's
the same line with paedophilia, isn't it? As we're learning that these intelligence services are involved in this. They, in particular, throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s, and up to the 90s. God knows what's going on today, but maybe that's all to come out yet.
But in a way, I think the satanic abuse is a sort of paraphernalia that goes with the paedophilia in order to protect the people who are conducting it. It's a sort of cover around the criminal acts, in order to try and penetrate into the minds of the kids that the devil's going to come and get them if they breathe a word of it to anybody else.
Yeah, well,
yeah, but excuse me, Tony, I suppose you wouldn't have seen these videos, but it's not just the minds that are being penetrated, I'm afraid.
No.
The children too much get injected. Just number-wise, we are talking about 20 children and 70 abusers, roughly, yeah? We don't know how many clients, but there is a great group called Hampstead Research now who are digging into the online presence and the connections amongst these abusers, whether it's Companies House, whether it's Facebook, whether it's tennis coaches, whether it's the parents, whether it's the churches, whether it's the teachers. And it's really a web and a net of abusers that is very, very dense and is quite far-leading. So now we've got the online community doing what the police should have done and doesn't do or hasn't done, because the cover-up is not only on the police level, and not only on the court level, and not only on the social services level, but also on the medical level. And the one big challenge is, of course, why are those whose distinguishing marks have been drawn by the children and very well described in detail, in terms of tattoos and birthmarks around the genital areas of the abusers, why haven't these people been examined? So there are, besides the medical report, there is this particular aspect, and of course the whole principle of the retraction of the allegations of the accusations.
Sorry, Sabine, to interrupt,
but there's as a cover-up to those who are willing and able to see. I don't think one needs to be biased, but it's also interesting that it's not as blatantly obvious as it is to me. So it's a very strange thing.
Well, I mean,
I guess
there is
a
big psychological aspect to this. I think you'd agree, Sabine, in a way, it's a bit like Hitler's big lie. The idea that you would do something so horrendous and so hideous just repels most people, even some police officers, from actually even going there psychologically. It's like a kind of psychological barrier in a way for people to even consider that this is possible. And of course, again, the Savile thing has helped to actually smash through that barrier and to get more and more people, millions of people across the country now, consider this to be, well, we wouldn't say normal, obviously, but it's much more easy to consider something like this going on. The other thing I would say is I interviewed Stuart Siveray down in the Channel Islands in Jersey last summer, and he was absolutely adamant that this does go right to the top. It goes to the Queen, the Duke of Edinburgh, to the royal family, because they've made several appeals now with absolutely cast iron proof and evidence that the Queen's own personal appointees, officers in the Channel Islands, have been overseeing abuse, and they've been overseeing criminal misuse of sick and disabled people, putting them into solitary confinement, this kind of thing. I mean, really the sort of stuff that you would maybe see in a medieval Hammer horror film going on right now in Jersey, and the turning of the head in the other direction as if nothing's going on. So actually, it would have been quite simple for Her Majesty to do something about this simply by reappointing somebody else in those key positions, the handful of key positions in the Channel Islands, and she's chosen not to do so. And I think you have to read that into that a pretty simple conclusion, which is that the royal family are actually aiding and abetting this criminality.
Well, let's look at Prince Charles and his relationship with Jimmy Savile. I mean, to hold keys to one of the most stronghold prisons we've got in the country, that just doesn't happen by default, doesn't it? A DJ getting access like that to was it a Category A prison? And then we look at the visits Savile made to the Channel Islands as well. It seems to me that from the top level, the royal aspects of it all, there's a lot more to come out yet, Tony, and I think we'll find that Prince Charles, by putting himself patron of the Secret Services, there's probably a good reason for that.
Well, I'm very intrigued that you bring this up, Tony, and I would welcome your advice, because yesterday I was speaking to Susan Lindauer at length, and she kept saying, "Oh, I'm so glad that I'm not British," but she knows how the UK establishment works. And of course, I've seen on the Coleman Experience blog how the entries on what he calls Filthy Britain, which is very, very explicit exactly about that aspect. But Susan, who is this extraordinary whistleblower in the US and who was involved in the Lockerbie bombing, as you mentioned, she said that I should write to Her Majesty. And so what do I write? Because obviously she should protect the children. She should maybe appoint somebody other than the current minister to ensure that protection does happen, and not just the fake care system with taking 1,000 children a month. And they should maybe do a national inquiry also into current abuse and not just historic. I haven't had the right frame of mind yet to produce that letter, but ironically, a letter to Prince Charles gave me more hits than anything on my blog about the National Inquiry, and that was written by Brian Peed, who is not only the survivor of abuse in a home, but also a whistleblower in Lambeth Council, which turned him into a victim of 3 police forces. And in my observation, the police are really more, if you like, criminal than anybody in this case. It's certainly Barnet Police. Yeah. It's certainly the Metropolitan.
Yeah, because I mean, this announcement this week on Monday about the IPCC inquiry into Cyril Smith MP has actually really, I think, for the first time, really exposed the detail behind the criminality that was going on within the police, and also the fact that there were actually quite a lot of detectives that were absolutely disgusted by it and sick by it. So, in a way, it does reflect back a bit on the discussion we were having earlier on about the BBC, where you've got many of these professional people are sitting in a kind of powerless position as they watch some of their colleagues, who seem to be being backed by their bosses, committing crimes day after day. Same within the police, same within the BBC. I mean, for example, evidence of witness testimony of senior politicians, senior civil servants being involved in child sexual abuse, simply being written out of statements, this kind of stuff. But ultimately, I think that there is going to be some kind of denouement here, and I would just say, if you're writing letters to anybody, I'm sure you're quite aware of this, Sabine, is always pick yourself 3 or 4 national newspaper editors and copy them into those letters, because there's no point in writing to the criminals, is there? I mean, particularly with the Princess Diana, there's quite clearly an involvement of the royal family at the senior level with the assassination of Diana. With this thing called the gosh, I can't remember the name of it now. It was a Way Ahead group, that's it, as part of the royal family. It was a kind of subcommittee of the royal family that were looking for years at the problem of Diana, and then disbanded as soon as she was dead. So it's pretty obvious through John Morgan's work and in his collecting together the evidence from the police inquiry in France, the police inquiry here in Britain, and the inquest that took place 3 coroners later, and 10 years after the event. There's actually plenty of evidence that the royal family are right in the frame with the Diana assassination too. So there's no point in writing to these people without copying them in. I mean, I actually spoke to a human rights activist, civil, I think sort of Liberty, the origins of Liberty, the group Liberty, that had a sort of little branch in the university here from the 1970s and 1980s, and they found the best tactic was to write to the local chief of police, copy it into the letters page of the local newspaper, and they get a reply straight back. I mean, if you've got a press which will report anything,
how about Christopher Booker?
You tend to get some resuls.
That's interesting.
How about Christopher Booker? Have you tried Christopher Booker?
Yes, of course. I mean, I hope at least he will feel sorry for me having to go into exile at some stage if he doesn't want to tackle Satanism.
But we've also got some brilliant MPs as well, Sabine, haven't we now? So we've got journalists, we've got MPs. You also, some of the most important work I think you've been doing is with the European Union's structures in this area. So, if you're going to send a letter, make sure you've got a sort of a basic little printout, mail merge or something where you can click, send it to those 50 other people, and so that it simply won't be good enough for the Queen, Prince Charles, or whoever it is that gets the letter to just simply put it in the bin, because it won't be in the bin in all those newspapers and MPs' in trays.
Okay.
Definitely agree. So one thing that's got me from this judgment was Pauffley's statement on saying that the clear message from recent events is that whilst Miss Draper is prepared to campaign using the internet, she's not willing to take part in this inquiry. But this stems back, doesn't it, from the intimidation process that whistleblowers seem to get from the beginning, and 9 police officers turning up at your doorstep. Luckily she had her legal counsel there at the time when they turned up, and he saw them off. They were there with even outer warrants. None of this was mentioned in that court case, wasn't it? The intimidation aspects. And
also the irony is Ella doesn't campaign herself at all.
No. No.
This is the accusation. They want to make her and me responsible. In fact, in that hearing on January 26, Pauffley dismissed her statement as saying that looks like it's having been penned by me, and she is too much under my influence.
Yeah, she seemed to concentrate very much on demonising the parents, Mr. Christie as well. She pulls to pieces the mobile phone recording by saying Mr. Christie is a directive towards the children, saying be quiet and go outside now. Come on, hurry up, outside, outside, outside. I don't play around, just stay there, that's it. That's right. That's right, discipline, he says. And a little later, sit around the table properly, son. Don't let me tell you again. You sit down properly, thank you. Well, these are sort of things that, you know, I mean, I've got an 8-year-old, and there are times when, you know, they can test your patience, and it's the sort of things that's said in, I'd say, near enough 90% of families in this country. She's played on this. She's played on this to make it sound like they're a controlling couple with their children, and I think this is a very dangerous trend to do in a court. And she's made sure that she, at every point, I mean, I've gone through this report, every page of highlighted bits where she seems to concentrate on doing her best to actually demonise the couple. Now, if they've not had a very proper investigation into this couple, and how's she come up, how's she drawn these conclusions? Just simply
well, this is the terrible thing. I mean, for me, how to decide how to take this further, I've also had to think and think and think, but now I wanted to remind absolutely anybody and everybody that the children are the messengers, and they have conveyed the message. Ella and Abraham had to kind of digest the information themselves. They had to get it out of them. That is the great achievement of Abraham, that he got them to talk.
Yeah.
Ella had always only suffered from the bad experience. In fact, they had been to Tavistock, and now I've got a tweet from somebody who believes that Tavistock Institute runs the cult. I've always asked myself, who teaches the Father Dearman? Where does he know from how to run a satanic cult?
Tavistock obviously having deep roots in social engineering, as it were, or social psychology aspects of things. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all. But one thing that really annoyed me here was when she stated that the ABE interviews on the 5th and the 11th of September are remarkable for a number of reasons, she says. Firstly, because the children describe a number of detailed allegations of ritualistic abuse. So she admits the fact that they're very detailed allegations. And second, because they do not articulately, with good eye contact or without trace of distress. Sorry, P can barely wait for the next question before she's chipping in with an answer. Both children are entirely matter-of-fact about what has happened. There's no trace of any emotional arousal. Well, obviously, she's contradicted what she says later in this document, because quite clearly, even children going through what they the allegations that they've made can suffer from PTSD, which is signs of emotional detachment. And she's answering her own question here. Why are the children so matter-of-fact about it? Well, that's a symptom of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder.
It is, absolutely. And she clearly has no idea what the children have through, and she clearly doesn't sympathize or empathize with the children, and therefore this whole charade of a family court that is supposed to find out what and act in the best interest of the children, it's just basically to A, the normal kind of snatching that goes on, and B, the handing over of the children to the abusive parent. And we've watched this pattern over and over again, and our next campaigning goal has to be to prevent the children from going to this father, and to somehow get a criminal court to listen on. And my submission to Brussels was I put in an emergency petition in the wake of the one on the about forced adoptions, that about the fact that secret family courts are used to cover up criminal activities, because her way of establishing facts to kind of then whitewash such criminal accusations. I mean, you cannot possibly derive justice from this.
No.
And, I mean, it's just so shocking in my view.
See, this isn't the first case that you've looked at, Sabine, isn't it? I mean, you've looked at multiple cases.
No, but it's the worst.
Sorry, it's the worst.
The worst.
Yeah, definitely the worst. Because of the just the vast size of the cult aspects of it. It makes this worse. The harrowing thing as well is that them children can quite clearly and quite conversely put across their experiences, and well, what she's trying to turn that into now is that the parents have done this. This is what, without any investigation, because my understanding of it, that the police investigation was dropped quite soon.
Yes, 11 days after the children were taken. And this is what I find so ridiculous. They focus absolutely on the mother and on the stepfather and forget about the message and don't listen to children. I mean, I've just found out today through a German press release that there is actually something action now about the children in terms of the United Nations, that children can be heard, or can even be some kind of a class action. And I've called the Terre des Hommes about this, because we need to internationalize the whole thing in better ways, and yes, go forward with the EU, where the Council of Europe is going to discuss the different levels of social services in April, and I'm curious whether the petition committee is going to talk about this particular emergency case as well. But there are so many fronts on which we need to fight. I've got one woman who's promised to write her response to this Pauffley judgment in terms of jurisdiction as well as EU directive, because she was the one who also put this document together on which I based then the submission to Brussels, which is, according to EU directives, I have acted lawfully when I sent the link to the videos to the Home Secretary. I was following a lawful course of action to uncover crime. And so this lady, Deborah, she says, I have acted lawfully, but the UK authorities have not. And in the process, I've discovered that, ironically, there has been an infringement notice issued to the UK in January 2014. The UK has then already violated an EU directive which was about child abuse and child abuse. So I put in a freedom of information request to get that particular infringement notice, and I put some allies onto that track of trying to find out what are the procedures, what does one do with a naughty UK which infringes on EU directives, and keep doing it again and keep doing it systematically. So there's a whole new battlefield that has opened now, I feel, thanks to the judgment and the challenge of the mainstream media, because the online the online community is certainly quite aroused, if you like, but it is not entirely convinced. There's lots of shills and hoaxes and trolls about. So it's a big job in terms of battle over the minds.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, we can draw parallels here that, within Europe, the UK is now getting quite clearly a bad reputation. We've had Putin speak up about the paedophilia rings here. We've quite recently, I think it was the Bulgarian Prime Minister who rebutted back at David Cameron. Something was brought up about the criminal aspects of immigrants coming here, and then the Bulgarian Prime Minister rebutted back by saying, well, at least we ain't full of paedophiles. So there is quite clearly throughout Europe a picture building up about our establishment and the paedophile connections that it's got, right down to through to child trafficking. What's your take on that, Tony, about our reputation abroad? I think we may have lost Tony there.
Well, I find it interesting that I didn't know that about this Bulgarian minister, because the last time I was officially in Brussels was because a Bulgarian mum was actually reporting about the forced adoption of her 2-year-old daughter, and it was a clearly pedophile father was involved, and I blogged about it saying we mobilized Bulgaria because she had got over 5,000 signatures together just in Bulgarian, and of course Bulgarian MEPs were very, very, very upset to hear about this. And you know, initially the Slovak government, and then the Romanian government, and then the Latvian government has now written to the UK as well. So I think or I hope in a way that this international embarrassment is going to have some kind of effect. But of course, the UK always think they are the masters of it all.
Yeah, I think it was the Romanian Prime Minister, I think, who bit back. If you want to check that up, right, Sabine, getting back into the nitty gritty of this judgment. There's so many contradictions when I actually read through this. Again, she says, again and again, as I watched the interviews, this is the interviews at the police, I presume, from the 5th and 11th of September, my sense was that the children, for most part, were in the realms of fantasy. There was an urgency and excitement about what they were saying as the detail become more elaborate. There were obvious parallels in what P was saying, with some respect to the storyline being in C.S. Lewis's Lion, Witch and the Wardrobe. Now, this isn't the first time, isn't it, that we've had, you know, it being compared to a story or a film or a TV program. I think the last one, wasn't it, that actually came from the police or social services, is that it sounded like something out of Zorro.
Yes, the Mask of Zorro was quoted before by another case, I was told as well. I mean, it is just so bizarre that they come up with it instead of believing the victim. I mean, isn't it peculiar? First, men get killed in wars, then women who are victims of rape are not believed, and now children who are victim of child abuse are not believed. I mean, they are 8 and 9. Why should they not and can't they believe? Why can't they? I mean, they could have even been asked to come to court for that matter, but of course it depends. They've clearly been so intimidated. You know, the body language in these retraction videos on the 17th, it is so obvious. There's a brilliant analysis on a blog called Crimes of Empire, where that the blogger has analyzed that particular interview with the boy, in extreme detail. And I just spoke to somebody this morning who's just done the same in parallel. She didn't know about that particular blog. And the way that this examining officer pushed the boy was clearly anything except achieving best evidence. So it's just really absolutely horrendous what these poor kids have had to go through, and we just must do our utmost to prevent them from being given to the father now. I mean, and what to do about this judgment? Okay, obviously we have got 21 days to file an appeal. And
is that going to happen, Sabine?
Yes, so we have to. I mean, we cannot just lean back and enjoy it. I mean, we must fight on all fronts, and so we need to tackle the council. I mean, I'm a big part of me is hoping the council will read just like they did in Rotherham. I mean, it's just so impossible. In fact, I remembered that there was also another case, a famous case with barrister Michelle Friedman, who she, after all, fled as well to Israel with her to make sure that her daughters are safe. And that was the same council, and so I need to write to her again, because what on earth does one do with such a bad and corrupt council?
We were speaking not so long ago with Ian Josephs about that case as well, and many others. But you do get the same particular patterns coming out with these cases, and it's just horrifying seeing that the same sort of circuit judges in top high-profile cases seem to be drawn out, and you get the same sort of pattern as to how they conduct the case. I just want to focus now on this medical evidence, because Pauffley seems to be a bit deceptive on some of the medical evidence, and it's Dr. Hodes, wasn't it?
Yes.
She says that both children were examined on the 12th and 16th of September by Dr. Hodes. It was reported that P and Q had a number of scars and abrasions consistent with their assertions of being physically abused by Mr. Christie. Well, that's a lead-in. aspects of it for a start
Well,
by mentioning that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It wasn't. It was for her to decide.
That's right. Well, she seems to have made a decision there on
Exactly.
Well, she carries on to say the examination of P's perineal area was performed in the left lateral position as recommended by the Royal College of Paediatrics and the Child Health Review of March 2008. Dr. Hodes identified 3 linear scars extending almost to the anal verge as well as the anal laxity after 10 seconds of gentle buttock retraction. There was, she said, no reflex and dilation. The second examinations occurred on the 16th of September. Dr. Rhodes described more of the rationale for asking to re-examine the children's genital areas because she wanted to re-examine them. She said, I've got this allegation which has been made to several people. Dr. Hodes had thought about it over the weekend and on reflection believed she should have examined the children in the knee-chest position, she added. It's not what you do, it's how you do it. Then on the 16th of September, each child provided Dr. Hodes with graphic details of how they were claimed to have been sexually abused, including the use of Vaseline on their bottoms and willies. They both said they'd experienced bleeding afterwards and that they said they were given wet tissue which to wipe themselves. Dr. Hodes' further genital examination of P revealed persistent reflex and dilation during buttock separation. The 3 linear healed scars were confirmed in relation to Q. Dr. Hodes confirms the physical findings of a scar in the anus from healed fissure consistent with infected injury from a blunt penetration force that he has alleged. So I'll carry on with this because we're going to get to an important part of this in a minute. Dr. Hodes wrote a further report on the 22nd of September, 5 days after the children had retracted their allegations. She repeated her physical findings and then comments upon the retraction in these terms. Until a study of 2007, it was mostly thought that the recantation rates were related to the certainty with which child sexual abuse is sustained and that the retraction of the true allegations is rare, and when a retraction occurs it's likely to be false. Lindsay et al. Found recantation rate of 16 to 0.9% in 257 cases of CSA. It relied on formal interviews by the police and social services. This is 4 times higher than previously reported in the most often cited Bradley and Wood case of 1996. In her concluding summary, Dr. Hodes states they have symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, I'm going back to where Pauffley has said that the kids showed no emotion, you know, they seem to be very matter of the fact. Well, here we have the doctor's report saying that them kids have symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's her opinion that the extensive and detailed accounts given by both children, repeated to different professionals, contain details of sexual acts that young children would need to have had some sort of direct experience. Now, Pauffley, it's a very long, see, sometimes this is how it gets very misleading. There's 157 points this over multiple pages. It's not until you sit down and read this report, this judgment, that you actually think, well, hold up a minute, you're contradicting yourself there. You're making assumptions now. You're making a judgment, a professional judgment, and you're going against the actual medical evidence. It goes back.
One commentator said that she hopes that Dr. Hodes would now go against this, but I'm not sure whether that's you know, who am I to know and find out, and that I don't think at this point, but it is terrific. Also, I just know that the council, the Barnett Council, got a psychiatrist to actually denigrate the quality of this medical report. They just wanted to deny, effectively. I mean, cover up and deny. That's what the whole case is about.
She goes on here. She questions the professionals. Pauffley, Judge Pauffley. She said, "I was troubled too that the children were subjected to intimate examinations to search for further signs twice in 5 days. I regret that Dr. Hodes was not asked exactly what she hoped to gain by the second examination, positioning the children differently." Seems to me that this doctor has stood out, and she's wanted to make her own, you know, professional, and let's face it, she's a paediatrician. It seems to me that Pauffley's very upset that this doctor had tried to pursue this and is taking side with the children, as it were. And she's actually stated in the medical report that these children are obviously suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. But Pauffley's not taken this on board at all. She's gone ahead and made this judgment, saying that the children were just very blasé about the whole thing.
Yes.
I just can't get that out of my head, how a judge, just a single judge, in what's turned out to be another secret court case without any representation on the other side at all, whilst we see up to 16 agencies supporting the local authorities side of the case, is just overlooking this evidence. I think it would be very sad if this judgment wasn't challenged in any way at all.
Well, no, it needs to be appealed, but that's not going to be our only strategy either. We will tackle the whole thing on a number of fronts, because the other kind of audacity that this woman had was she's more or less tried to tell the mother that she would handle the judicial review, which we filed in December against the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, and they, of course, denied the whole thing as well, and that just now is waiting for anybody to pick up. So we need to run with that, and we need to run with the IPCC complaint as well, which Ella filed, because otherwise we couldn't have filed the judicial review, but that had been done as well. And then, of course, there's the nice idea of private prosecutions, which I had already nearly 300 signatures for that. When both of my petitions were taken down. I don't know whether you were aware of that, but that's another
did see that,
nice little interference by the powers that be.
Yeah.
Supposedly because of the links to elements relating to court proceedings. Well, Change.org claimed that they sent me an email, but which they never did, because the only thing was they put up a notice in the help area where, you wouldn't believe it, but on the 4th of March, they claimed they did put it up, but I, on the 10th of March, asked the help center, listen, why have all those links disappeared from my petition? And they I can't remember the details they said. Anyway, they didn't know about that request on the 4th. And I only saw the request of about the 4th after they had taken the whole petition down, and they claim it's not restorable. And now somebody else came up with a petition to ask to reinstate the petition or to give full reasons. So it's a new kind of a war that is.
It's an attack.
Internet tools, isn't it funny in a way?
Yeah. I mean, we go on here. It's she sums up, says there was no satanic or other cult at which babies were murdered and children were sexually abused. Well, I want to see the proof of that, because the police investigation was dropped rather quickly. I see parallels in a case that happened here in Weston-super-Mare with a local school, when a similar paedophile, well, the headmaster for that case is now serving 14 years. But I see exactly the same things happening with the school here that's happening in Hampstead, where they shut down the websites. There was a total ring fenced, and they actually ended up changing the name of the school. I understand that Hampstead, they've changed a lot of the staff there as well, which were named. But then she goes on to say all the material promulgated by Miss Draper, now published on the internet, is nothing than utter nonsense. Well, we've heard this before, haven't we? Renowned by the paedophile protection people, David Cameron himself last year saying that this is all conspiracy theory, and Kenneth Clark saying silly stories from the 80s nonsense. Well, we've heard that word nonsense, and they seem to utter nonsense a lot. But what seems to happen is, give it time, and these stories that turn out to be portrayed as being nonsense actually turn out being true. Look at the Dolphin Square incidents, look at the Elm Guest House incidents, look at the care home, Nottingham, North Wales. We can go on and on and on, all labelled as nonsense, all labelled as conspiracy theories. Why isn't this any different?
Because it's conspiracy realism.
Yeah, and that's what we've got to start calling it now. She says the children's false stories came about as a result of a relentless emotional and psychological pressure, as well as significant physical abuse. Torture is the most accurate way to describe what was done. Now she again accuses Mr. Christie in collaboration with Ms. Draper. Well, I want to see the evidence for that. Both children were assaulted by Mr. Christie by being hit with a metal spoon on multiple multiple occasions over the head and legs, being pushed into walls, punched, pinched and kicked. Water was poured over them as they knelt semi-clothed. Well, you know, this really concerns me, how they've really turned this story a whole 180 degrees.
Yes.
It's now within that short space of time that this hearing's been going on, that all of a sudden now, oh no, it's the parents that haven't been able to have representation and have had to flee. I emphasise the word had to flee for their own safety, and now just totally accused of the whole thing. And I just cannot see from that video, there was no hint to me that them children were being pressured in that sort of way.
They were definitely pressured by the guy on the 17th in the retraction interview. That's for sure. But and they were pressured also, by the way, to kill that Ella and Abraham. That came also out in conversations. But so there's Abraham says he's going to work on a statement. Ella has produced one which recently, because there were lots and lots of people who were asking and wanted to hear, and I think well, it's a new phase that's starting now. It's a new round, but
right.
This document is certainly quite an bizarre statement of audacity. I think that it's in a way it reflects the same kind of arrogance that the sort of British Empire mindset still seems to have.
Well,
she clearly thought that with that statement and with that with the mainstream the general public, but I hope that the internet community is smart enough and that they are not the kind of mainstream media sheeple kind of readers, so that we will that she won't succeed in what she wants to do. But then it's not she who runs the show, it's the father, and that is the big question. How come he has so much clout that he does not only have influence over the judges, but even the police and everybody else who contributes? You know, it's quite remarkable.
Well, no one in their right mind, doesn't they, as a parent, would really put their children through what the judge is accusing them of doing. I really can't understand that. And just having seen that video, there was no indication there that the children were actually showing any sort of being scared or intimidated by the parents at the time. It seemed that they were glad to be talking about it and
yes,
getting it off their chest. That's how it come across to me.
Yes, absolutely. And remember, after all, they had talked to Ella and Abraham for days already before they just made these little recordings here and there. So they are just snippets of reality after all. And I was mostly impressed by the utter consistency between the boy and the girl, and at different points in time, you know, and therefore then the retraction, they were just so obviously.
Well, the only intimidation I've seen was from one of the police interviews where that child, the boy, was left in that room for about 15-20 minutes and then he becomes scared. That to me is torture.
Yes.
That to me is intimidation. And that's the only evidence I've seen of any intimidation has come from the authorities. So, well, it's interesting. You'll have to keep us updated, Sabine, on how we're going to go forward with this and the appeal, or whether a private prosecution's going to take place. It's something.
Well, it's not an either or. I think we'll do both.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Well, we wish you all the best with that as well, and we're certainly going to keep looking at this case as well, because there's too many holes in it for me. That judgment, you know, I've read it quite thoroughly a bit last night and this morning, and there's just so many contradictions in it, and there's so many well, how can I say, allegations made by Pauffley that have particular patterns that we've seen in other cases. It seems to me it's rolling off a script here. And the first thing you do is demonise either the family, the parents, or the extended family. That seems to be how they deal in with it. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this one develops.
Do you feel like writing it up? What you've come to conclude?
I would. Yeah. That's no problem
mean,
at all.
I would be delighted to publish it on the blog, but I mean, you could send it to either the judge himself, also to the clerk. I think it really has to happen.
We've got to let them know
that they are being watched. They can't just get away with it.
Exactly. Okay, Sabine, well, I'll take that offline with you. I'll send you an email, and we see how we can take that forward.
I would be delighted. Thank you.
That's great. Well, thanks again for joining us, Sabine. Do take care and look after yourself. You have got people on your side. I know it's difficult, the circumstances you're in. It must be so frustrating as well.
It is.
Yeah, I can imagine. Anyway, you take care, and thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much indeed. Night.
Good night. Take care. Well, that's it from tonight. Hope you've enjoyed the show. Thanks for those that tweeted in. Loads of tweets there going through. Just people finding it unbelievable, really. I'm still getting my head around this judgment. As I say, I really got into the nitty-gritty of this today, and I just couldn't believe the contradictions in there. Right, okay, don't forget, Kai's back with us this Thursday on Peacekeeper Night. He's got a blinding guest lined up for us as well. Apparently, more guests. We'll announce them over the next couple of days. Meanwhile, anything you want to discuss, let us know via Twitter at Bastion Radio, or you can email us here at the studio, studio@bastionradio.com. For me, Mike West, take care, have a great week, and we'll catch you on Thursday.